The old truck rattled down the dirt road, its headlights flickering weakly against the thick wall of trees ahead. The air was heavy with pine and damp soil, the kind of scent that lingered in the back of your throat. Inside the cab, two children sat in silence, their small frames pressed tightly against each other as though contact alone might keep them safe. 7-year-old Ethan held his sister Lila's hand so tightly that her knuckles were white. She was only 4, her eyes wide and unblinking, staring out the window as the last traces of daylight sank into the horizon. Their mother didn't speak. She hadn't spoken much at all in days. Her hands gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles too were pale, and her lips moved in a whisper that neither child could hear. Lila, sensing the wrongness in the air, leaned closer to Ethan and buried her face in his side. Ethan kept his gaze fixed on the darkening road. He was old enough to know that something was very, very wrong. The truck jolted to a stop. The forest loomed on either side, dense and unwelcoming. Their mother turned to them then, her eyes bloodshot, her face wet with tears she didn't seem to notice. She whispered something, Ethan never forgot it. "I'm sorry. You'll be safer here." Her voice cracked. She kissed Lila's forehead, then Ethan's, and for a fleeting moment he thought she might change her mind, that she might start the engine and drive them back home. But instead she opened the door. The night air rushed in cool and damp. "Out," she said. Ethan hesitated, clutching his sister tighter. "Mom," his voice was trembling, small. "We'll be good, we promise. We'll out." Her tone was sharp this time, final. There was no room for pleading. Ethan obeyed, sliding from the seat with Lila in tow. Their bare feet touched the gravel, the sharp stones biting their skin. The forest stood before them, silent, endless. Ethan turned back just in time to see his mother's face one last time, her eyes hollow, her lips trembling as though she wanted to say more. Then she slammed the door, started the engine, and the truck roared to life. "Mom?" Lila's voice was a whisper. "Where's Mommy going?" Ethan didn't answer. He stood frozen, staring as the taillights disappeared into the black. The sound of the engine grew fainter, then vanished completely, leaving only the chirping of crickets and the rustling of leaves. And then silence. Lila tugged on his arm. "Ethan? Where is she? When is she coming back?" His throat tightened. He wanted to lie, to tell her their mother would be right back. But the hollow pit in his stomach told him the truth, one he couldn't voice. She wasn't coming back. Not now, not ever. He swallowed hard and took her hand. "It's okay," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. "I'm here. I won't leave you." The words were a promise, and though he didn't fully understand it yet, it was a promise that would shape the rest of their lives. The forest loomed like a living thing. The tall pines seemed to close in around them, the shadows twisting into shapes that made Lila whimper and clutch Ethan's shirt. The air grew colder with every passing minute, and the sky above them, once streaked with purple and gold, was now a blanket of black. Ethan led her into the trees. He didn't know why, maybe because the road felt too exposed, too empty. Maybe because if he followed the forest far enough, they'd find a house or a cabin, or someone who could help. The ground was soft and uneven, roots catching their feet, branches scratching their skin. Lila cried quietly, the sound muffled against her brother's side. Ethan fought his own tears. He couldn't let her see him cry. Not now. Minutes blurred into hours. The night stretched long and merciless, and the forest seemed endless. Hunger gnawed at their bellies, thirst burned their throats, and the cold bit deep into their skin. When Lila's legs gave out, Ethan carried her, his small body trembling with exhaustion. He found a fallen tree, its hollow trunk wide enough to crawl inside, and settled her there. It smelled of damp rot and moss, but it shielded them from the wind. Lila curled into his arms, her tears drying on his shirt. "Tell me a story," she whispered. Her voice was weak, trembling. Ethan hesitated. His mind was blank, his chest heavy with fear, but then words spilled out, fragments of fairy tales their mother used to tell. Except his version was different. In his story, the children always found their way home, always reunited with the family who had lost them. It was a lie, but it was all he had to give her. She fell asleep before he finished, her breath soft and shallow against his chest. Ethan lay awake, staring into the darkness beyond the hollow trunk. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves made his heart race. Somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted, and the forest seemed to breathe with secrets too heavy for children to bear. His arm ached, and when he rubbed it absent-mindedly, his fingers brushed against a faint mark on his skin, something like ink, though blurred and smudged, as though it had been there since before he could remember. He didn't think much of it then. It was just part of him, another mystery in a night already overflowing with them. He closed his eyes and whispered again the promise he'd made, "I won't leave you." But as the night deepened and the cold crept in, Ethan couldn't help but wonder if the forest would swallow them whole before the morning came. The hollow log was damp, but it was the only shelter Ethan could find before the darkness swallowed everything. The forest around them seemed alive, whispering with every shift of wind through the trees. The tall pines creaked like old bones, and the ground was littered with needles that muffled their footsteps but pricked their skin when they sat still too long. Ethan pulled Lila closer, wrapping his thin arms around her to keep her warm. Her small body shivered against him, her breath rattling softly in the cool night air. She had stopped crying, but that wasn't a comfort, it was the silence that worried him most. Lila had always been quick with questions, always tugging at his sleeve with endless curiosity. Now, her wide eyes were glazed with exhaustion, too heavy to stay open. She was drifting in and out of sleep. He stared into the darkness, listening. Crickets chirped in a rhythm that filled the silence, but every so often, another sound cut through, the snap of a branch, the low, distant howl of something wild. Each time Ethan's heart clenched and he gripped his sister tighter. The log was hardly protection. If anything came for them, there would be nowhere to run. Hunger gnawed at him. He had eaten nothing since the half-slice of bread their mother gave them that morning, and Lila even less. His stomach twisted, but he forced himself to stay still, to stay strong. If he let his fear show, Lila would feel it too, and then the night would break them both. "Ethan?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "I'm here," he said quickly, his hand brushing her hair back from her damp forehead. "Is Mommy coming back?" The question landed like a stone in his chest. He hesitated, and for the first time he wanted to lie. He wanted to tell her yes, that their mother was just down the road, that this was all a game and they'd be home by morning. But the memory of taillights disappearing into the night was burned into his mind. "No," he said softly, surprising himself. His voice cracked, but he pressed on. "No, she's not. But I'll take care of you. Always." Lila's lips trembled. She nodded, pressing her face into his shirt again. His promise hung in the air, heavier than the mist curling between the trees. It wasn't just words now, it was a vow, one that would define his every choice from here on. The hours dragged. Every time Ethan's eyes grew heavy, a sound jolted him awake. At one point he thought he saw eyes glinting in the distance, low to the ground, watching them. He held his breath, not daring to move until the shadows shifted and the eyes vanished. Coyotes maybe. Or something worse. Lila stirred in her sleep, murmuring nonsense words, clutching his shirt like a lifeline. He thought about the house they had left behind, the sagging porch, the faint smell of his mother's perfume, the creak of floorboards at night. It was already fading from memory, as though the forest was swallowing it piece by piece, replacing it with damp earth, cold air, and the endless hum of insects. He rubbed his arm absent-mindedly, his fingers tracing the faint blur of the tattoo on his skin. He had never thought much of it, but tonight it seemed strange, out of place, like a secret etched into his body without his permission. He pressed his palm against it, as though covering it would make it disappear. By the time dawn broke, Ethan felt like he hadn't slept at all. A pale gray light seeped through the canopy, washing the forest in mist. Birds stirred, their calls sharp and eerie in the morning quiet. Lila woke with a cough, her lips dry, her face pale. "I'm thirsty," she whispered. He swallowed hard. His own throat felt like sandpaper. "We'll find water today," he promised. He said it with confidence, though he had no idea how. Crawling out of the log, Ethan took in the world around them. The forest stretched in every direction, vast and endless. The dirt road was gone from sight, swallowed by the trees. For the first time, he realized just how deep they had been taken before their mother left them. The Piney Woods was no ordinary forest. It was a labyrinth of green, miles upon miles of identical trees. Lila climbed out behind him, holding his hand tightly. Her small frame looked even smaller against the towering trees. Her hair was tangled, her clothes smudged with dirt, her shoes worn thin. She looked like a ghost of the little girl she had been just the day before. They set off, Ethan in front, Lila clinging close. Every step was a battle against exhaustion, but they pressed forward. The forest floor was slick with dew, and their feet sank into the mossy earth. The smell of damp leaves filled the air. After what felt like hours, they stumbled on a shallow stream, its surface glinting with the weak morning light. Lila gasped, falling to her knees. Ethan knelt beside her, cupping water in his hands, bringing it to her lips. It tasted of mud and roots, but it was wet and it was enough. They drank until their bellies ached. For a moment, relief washed over him. For a moment he believed they might be okay. But then from somewhere beyond the stream, a noise broke the calm, a sharp crack like a branch snapping underfoot. Ethan froze, his body stiff. He pulled Lila behind him, his heart pounding in his ears. The forest went silent as if holding its breath. Then another crack. Closer. Lila's fingers dug into his arm. Her voice was a tremor. "Ethan, who's there?" He stared into the trees, searching the shadows. His pulse raced, fear clamped around his chest. And though nothing emerged, the sense of being watched hung heavy in the air, as though the forest itself was waiting to reveal something he wasn't ready to face. The days that followed blurred together, a haze of hunger, fear, and stubborn determination. Ethan quickly learned that time in the Piney Woods didn't flow like it had at home. Out here there were no clocks, no school bells, no hum of television in the background. There was only light and dark, hunger and the fleeting comfort of a full belly, cold nights and mornings that smelled of wet pine and soil. By the second week, the shock of their mother's abandonment had hardened into something else. Ethan stopped expecting her return. Each sunrise made the memory of the truck's taillights fade further into the mist. But Lila still asked, "When is Mommy coming?" she whispered every night before sleep. And every night Ethan repeated the same words, "She's not. But I am. I'm not going anywhere." It was that promise, not food, not shelter, not even hope, that carried them through. At first, survival was desperate guesswork. They ate berries Ethan hoped weren't poisonous, drank from streams without knowing if the water was clean, and huddled together under the boughs of trees when rain soaked them through. The forest tested them relentlessly. Lila caught a fever after drinking stagnant water, her body burning with heat while she shook in his arms. Ethan panicked, thinking she might die there in the mud, but somehow the fever broke with the dawn. She survived, though thinner and weaker than before. Slowly, Ethan began to notice patterns. Certain plants gave them stomachaches while others didn't. The brighter the berry, the more dangerous it seemed. Mushrooms with red caps made his tongue sting, so he never touched them again. They learned to follow animal tracks to find water and how to scrape moss from bark for a bitter but chewable meal. Their hands grew calloused, their feet tough from walking barefoot after their shoes fell apart. The forest, once terrifying, began to reveal itself as a teacher. The siblings became its students. By the time a year had passed, Ethan had turned 8. His shoulders were broader now, his gaze sharper. Lila, at 5, had lost the roundness of a toddler. She was wiry, quick, her hair tangled into a wild halo. They still looked like children, but there was something feral about them, something that made them seem older than their years. At night, around the small fires, Ethan eventually learned to build by striking rocks together until sparks caught in dry pine needles. They told each other stories. Not the fairy tales their mother had once whispered, but their own creations. Tales of children who could talk to the deer, who could fly above the treetops, who would one day find a village made entirely of bread and honey. In the silence of the woods, their voices echoed, and in the flicker of firelight, imagination softened the edges of their reality. Still, shadows lingered. Ethan carried questions like stones in his chest. Why had their mother left them? Who was their father? A man he barely remembered, his face a blur. And why, in the dim firelight, did the strange ink mark on his arm sometimes seem darker, clearer, almost like it was meant to mean something? Lila noticed it too. One evening she reached out, tracing the faint lines with her fingertip. "It looks like a drawing," she said. Ethan pulled his arm back. "It's nothing." But she shook her head, eyes solemn. "It's not nothing. It's like a secret." The words unsettled him, though he didn't understand why. The tattoo, if that's what it was, had always been there, a smudge of ink blurred into his skin since he was old enough to notice. It didn't belong, not on a child's arm. And though he tried to ignore it, Lila's fascination with it grew. She began to ask questions he couldn't answer. "Who gave it to you? Why do you have it?" Ethan didn't know. He only knew that in time the mark would become a key, though to what, he couldn't imagine. Years crept by. Seasons came and went, marked not by calendars but by the shifting colors of the forest. Winters bit with cold that left them trembling and near starved. Summers weighed heavy with heat and mosquitoes that left welts across their skin. Storms uprooted trees, floods swept away makeshift shelters, and droughts turned streams to dry beds. And yet they endured. Ethan became a hunter. At first he caught frogs, then squirrels, and eventually deer with crude snares he fashioned from vines. He carved tools from stone, learned to sharpen sticks into spears. Lila learned to weave grasses into baskets, to make crude mats for sleeping, to forage with a careful eye. She was quick, clever, and had an instinct for danger. When Ethan wanted to try an unfamiliar fruit, It was Lila who stopped him, shaking her head with that uncanny certainty only she seemed to have. More than once it saved them both. Their bond grew iron strong. They quarreled, of course, about food, about which way to walk, about whether to risk approaching the sound of human voices that occasionally drifted from the edges of the forest. But no matter the argument, they always ended the day curled together under the same shelter, whispering apologies before sleep. The forest began to whisper back in its own way. Rumors drifted in from the world beyond. Hikers who strayed too far spoke of strange children glimpsed in the trees, eyes shining in the moonlight. Hunters swore they saw shadows darting through the brush, too quick to be caught. The locals in the nearest towns began to share stories at diners and bars, tales of the ghost kids of Willow Pines. Some said they were wild animals mistaken for children. Others swore they were spirits, forever wandering the woods. The siblings never knew these stories existed. To them the forest was simply home. But to the outside world they were becoming legend. By the time Ethan was 15 and Lila 12, their childhood in the forest had carved them into survivors. Their bodies bore scars from brambles, burns from campfires, and countless scrapes from narrow escapes. Their clothes were long gone, replaced by pelts and crude wraps. They spoke to each other in a shorthand of whispers and gestures, their language shaped by years of secrecy. And yet, for all their resilience, the shadow of abandonment never left them. Lila still dreamed of their mother some nights, waking in tears. Ethan still traced the tattoo on his arm in the dark, wondering why it seemed darker now, clearer, as if the forest itself was sharpening its edges. Neither of them knew it yet, but that faint mark carried a truth that would unravel everything. A truth that linked their survival not just to the forest but to blood, betrayal, and murder. And on the edge of the forest, in the quiet town of Willow Pines, the rumors about the Children of Shadows were about to attract the wrong kind of attention. By the time Ethan reached 16 and Lila 13, they no longer thought of themselves as lost children. The forest was not only their cage but their kingdom, and within its endless expanse of pine and oak, they had carved out something like a life. Their bodies reflected it. Ethan was tall and lean, muscles wiry from years of climbing trees, dragging logs, and carrying Lila on nights when she couldn't walk. His hair had grown long, falling into his eyes, streaked with sun and dirt. Lila, smaller but fierce, moved like a fox through the underbrush, her senses sharp in ways even Ethan couldn't match. She could tell by the sound of a bird whether a predator was near, could smell the difference between clean water and stagnant pools. Together they moved like shadows, silent, quick, always aware. The forest had raised them and in return they belonged to it. Still, there were days when Ethan stood at the edge of a clearing and stared at the horizon, where the line of trees ended. He wondered what lay beyond: roads, towns, people. He remembered fragments of that other world, the shape of a house, the distant roar of cars, the feel of fabric that wasn't tanned hide against his skin. For Lila those memories were hazier. To her the outside was more myth than memory. "Do you ever want to go back?" she asked once as they crouched by a stream, cleaning fish Ethan had speared with a sharpened stick. "Back where?" Ethan muttered, keeping his eyes on the blade of stone in his hand. "Where we came from." He paused, the muscles in his jaw tightening. "There's nothing to go back to." She didn't push. But the way she watched him told him she wondered the same things he did. Life in the forest was constant struggle, but it was predictable. Seasons turned like a wheel and with each one came new lessons. In summer they gorged on berries, built shelters of woven branches to escape the heat. In autumn they gathered nuts and dried meat in crude caches. Winter was hardest. Their fires smoked, their breath froze in the air, and sometimes Ethan lay awake, certain Lila's shivers beside him would be her last. Yet spring always returned, thawing their hunger, reminding them that survival was possible. But outside their little world, stories were spreading. Hunters whispered of figures glimpsed between the trees, too small to be grown men, too fluid to be animals. Campers swore they heard laughter in the dark, high and eerie like children at play. More than once Ethan and Lila found scraps left behind: soda cans, cigarette butts, candy wrappers. Sometimes they watched from the shadows as strangers wandered too close. Once, a boy their age spotted Lila crouched behind a fallen tree. His scream sent his family running, swearing he'd seen a ghost girl with tangled hair and glowing eyes. The towns near the Piney Woods had names for them: the Children of Shadows, the forest's ghosts, the lost ones. Some believed they were spirits of dead children. Others claimed they were wild, raised by wolves. Parents used the stories to frighten their kids into obedience. "Don't wander off or the forest children will find you." Ethan and Lila never knew they'd become legends. For them, avoiding people wasn't a choice, it was instinct. The memory of their mother's face, wet with tears and lit by the dim glow of the truck's dash, was a wound that never healed. Trusting people meant risking abandonment again. Better to stay unseen. But the forest in its own way betrayed them. One autumn afternoon, Ethan and Lila tracked a deer deeper than usual, further toward the edges where trees thinned and roads sometimes cut through. The deer had been their biggest kill yet, and dragging it had taken hours. They didn't notice the two hunters following the blood trail until it was too late. The men stopped dead when they saw the siblings crouched over the animal, their faces streaked with mud, clothes fashioned from hides, eyes sharp and wary. One of the men dropped his rifle in shock. "What the? Did you see that?" His voice cracked. "They look like kids," the other whispered. Ethan froze. Lila gripped his arm, trembling. In that instant Ethan had to choose. Run or stay. Instinct roared through him. He snatched Lila's hand and together they bolted into the trees, vanishing in seconds. Behind them, the hunters shouted, their voices carried through the forest. "Hey, wait, kids." But Ethan didn't stop. Not until they were miles away, lungs burning, did he slow. Lila collapsed beside him, sobbing quietly. He held her, his own heart pounding in terror. "They saw us," she whispered. "They'll tell." He didn't answer. But in his gut he knew she was right. That night, when the fire flickered low and the forest wrapped them in silence, Ethan traced the tattoo on his arm again. The lines seemed sharper now, clearer in the firelight. It wasn't just a mark. It was something meant to be seen. Something tied to the world beyond the trees. And if the hunters carried tales back to town, then soon the world beyond would come looking for them. The weeks after the hunters' sighting carried a tension Ethan couldn't shake. The forest, usually a familiar rhythm of bird calls and rustling leaves, felt disturbed. Every snap of a branch sounded louder. Every rustle of undergrowth seemed like footsteps. Lila noticed too. She stuck closer to Ethan, her usual confidence in foraging replaced by nervous glances over her shoulder. At night, she woke more often, whispering that she dreamed of eyes watching them from the dark. Ethan tried to dismiss it, but even he couldn't ignore the subtle shifts. Birds scattered more easily. The deer grew scarce. And once, while filling their water skins from a creek, he spotted something lodged in the mud, a footprint. Human. Fresh. He didn't tell Lila. Instead, he doubled their patrols, moved their camp more often, and kept the fire small and smoky so it wouldn't be seen. But caution wasn't enough. One dusky evening, as twilight draped the forest in blue shadow, Lila froze mid-step. She tugged Ethan's arm, pointing. Through the trees, faint but undeniable, glowed the flicker of a lantern. They weren't alone. Ethan pulled her down behind a log, pressing a finger to his lips. Together they watched as a figure moved carefully between the trees. Not a hunter. His movements were too deliberate, too practiced. The lantern swung low, casting just enough light to reveal a man in his 30s, dressed in rugged clothes, boots caked with mud. A pack slung across his back suggested he meant to stay. The man stopped, crouched, and examined the ground. Ethan's stomach dropped. The stranger was tracking. The man raised his head, and for a moment Ethan thought their eyes met. His heart lurched, every instinct screaming to run. But the man only adjusted his lantern and moved on, deeper into the woods, toward the area where Ethan and Lila had last built a shelter. Lila clutched Ethan's sleeve. "He's looking for us." "I know," Ethan whispered. That night they didn't sleep. They crouched in silence, listening as faint echoes of the stranger's presence drifted through the trees. Footsteps, the snap of twigs, the low hum of a tune carried on the wind. He was patient. Relentless. A hunter not of animals but of them. Days passed. The man returned again and again. Always with the lantern, always scanning, searching. Sometimes he left food, strips of jerky, bread wrapped in cloth, placed carefully near trails as if to lure them. Ethan refused to touch it, convinced it was bait. But Lila's curiosity gnawed at her. "What if he wants to help us?" she asked one night, her voice small. Ethan shook his head. "People don't help. They take. They leave. That's all." Yet despite his words, he couldn't shake the image of the man's face, sharp eyes, a firm jaw, and something almost sorrowful in his expression. Unlike the hunters, this stranger wasn't surprised. He was expecting them. On the fourth night, Ethan and Lila crept close enough to spy on his camp. The man sat by a fire, a small notebook in his hands. His lantern cast a halo of gold around him as he sketched something on the page. Ethan squinted, straining to see. Then his breath caught. It wasn't just sketches of the forest. It was them. Crude drawings of two children, One taller, one smaller, with tangled hair and wary eyes. Ethan felt a chill crawl up his spine. The man knew they existed. He wasn't here by chance. Before they could retreat, the man spoke into the night, his voice calm but carrying. "I know you're out there," he said, not looking up from his book. "You've been watching me just like I've been watching you." Ethan's blood froze. Lila gripped his hand so tightly her nails dug into his skin. The man turned a page. "You don't have to be afraid. I'm not here to hurt you. I just want to understand." Silence. Only the fire crackled. The man sighed, closing the notebook. His voice softened, threaded with something that almost sounded like grief. "Your mother, she wanted me to find you." Lila gasped. Ethan yanked her back into the shadows before she could make a sound, his heart pounding in his ears. His mind spun. How could this man know about their mother? They fled into the dark, running until their legs gave out. Collapsing beside a fallen tree, Ethan fought to steady his breath. "He's lying," he insisted, though the tremor in his voice betrayed him. Lila's eyes shone with tears. But what if he's not? The forest around them whispered in the night breeze, as if weighing the stranger's words. And for the first time in years, Ethan felt the fragile certainty of their world crack. The tattoo on his arm throbbed, the ink clearer than ever in the moonlight. The man's words echoed like a curse. "Your mother wanted me to find you." And suddenly Ethan realized that survival was no longer their only fight. The past, the one they had buried beneath moss and silence, was coming for them. Sleep was impossible after the stranger's words. Ethan and Lila huddled under the twisted roots of an old oak, listening to the wind and each other's uneven breaths. Lila's questions tumbled out in a whisper. "What did he mean, Ethan? How does he know about Mom? Why would he say she wanted him to find us?" Ethan had no answers. His thoughts churned like the river in flood. For years, he had forced himself not to think about their mother, not to replay the sight of her face in the rearview mirror as she left them. Anger had hardened into stone. But now, her ghost was everywhere, in the stranger's voice, in Lila's wide eyes, and in the throbbing reminder inked into his own skin. When dawn came, Ethan forced his exhaustion aside. "We move north," he said, hoisting the pack of supplies they'd cobbled together. Deeper. Away from him. Lila trudged silently behind him, her gaze lowered. She didn't argue, but Ethan could feel her doubt like a weight pressing between them. 4 days they traveled, skirting streams, hiding from the rare hikers, sleeping in caves when storms lashed the forest. Yet no matter how far they went, signs of the stranger followed. Once they found another pile of food neatly arranged on a flat stone: bread, apples, jerky. Another time, Lila spotted smoke curling above the trees, too close to mistake for lightning-struck fire. "He's not giving up," she said, her voice trembling with both fear and something dangerously close to hope. One evening, as they gathered firewood, Lila caught Ethan staring at his arm again. The tattoo, faint in childhood, seemed darker now, the edges less blurred, like a picture trying to surface from beneath his skin. "You think it's connected, don't you?" she asked softly. Ethan swallowed hard. "I don't know what to think." But in truth he did. Deep down he'd always sensed the mark meant something. It wasn't natural, not for a child to carry such a thing. It was less like a decoration and more like a brand. A stamp. A claim. That night, sleep finally came, but with it came dreams. Ethan saw flashes, his mother crying in a dimly lit room, voices raised in anger, a man's hand gripping her arm. Then, a needle, pressing ink into his skin as he cried out. And over it all, a voice he didn't recognize, deep and commanding: "He'll carry the mark. They'll know." Ethan jerked awake, heart racing, sweat slick on his forehead. The fire had burned to embers. Lila was curled against him, fast asleep. His arm throbbed where the tattoo lay. For the first time, Ethan wasn't sure if it was just a dream, or a memory. The next day, the forest betrayed them again. As they crossed a narrow stream, Ethan froze. On the opposite bank, standing as still as a statue, was the stranger. No lantern this time. No notebook. Just his eyes fixed on them. Lila gasped. Ethan instinctively stepped in front of her, his body tense. The man raised his hands slowly, palms open. "I don't want to hurt you," he called across the water. His voice was steady, but there was urgency in it. "Please? I knew your mother." The words sliced through Ethan like a blade. Rage flared hot and blinding. "You're lying," he shouted, the echo carrying through the trees. The man shook his head. "Her name was Margaret. Margaret Anderson. She had 2 children, Ethan and Lila. She begged me to keep looking when no one else would. She said they'd be safer lost than found, but she couldn't forgive herself for leaving. Lila's hand slipped into Ethan's. Her voice was a whisper meant only for him. He knows her name. Ethan's chest tightened. The stranger's words matched the dream, the memory. Could it be true? Could their mother have spoken of them after she disappeared? The man took a cautious step closer, water lapping at his boots. Ethan, he said, eyes flicking toward the tattoo, that mark on your arm, it's not random. It's a sign. A warning. It ties you to the man who hurt her. The man who, his voice faltered but he pressed on. The man who killed your father. The world seemed to tilt. Ethan stumbled back, his vision narrowing. Lila gasped, clutching his arm as if to anchor him. Their father, a man Ethan barely remembered, whose face was a blur, whose name had never been spoken aloud since that night in the truck. Dead. Murdered. And somehow Ethan carried the mark of the killer. The stranger didn't cross the stream. He just stood there watching, waiting. His expression was not triumphant but sorrowful, as if he had no joy in sharing the truth. Ethan turned, dragging Lila away before she could speak. They ran until their lungs burned, branches tearing at their skin. Only when they collapsed in a clearing miles away did Ethan finally let go. Lila's eyes were wide with terror and wonder. Ethan, what if he's telling the truth? Ethan stared at the tattoo on his arm, the lines burning in the moonlight. His voice broke as he whispered, then everything we've ever known has been a lie. The forest had always felt alive, whispering in the wind, breathing in the rustle of leaves, but that night, it seemed to press down on them, suffocating. Ethan sat hunched by the fire, his arm thrust into the light, staring at the tattoo as if sheer will might force it to confess its secrets. Lila watched him, knees drawn to her chest. It's not just ink, she said softly. It's like it's part of you. Ethan wanted to deny it, to insist it was nothing but an old scar, a blur of lines. But the stranger's words gnawed at him. It ties you to the man who killed your father. His father. A word that felt foreign in his mouth. He tried to recall a face, a voice, even a single moment, but all he found were fragments. A hand rough with calluses. A laugh deep and short. Then nothing. Lila's memories were even fainter. She was too young when it all happened. But the idea of their father being murdered, and Ethan carrying the killer's mark, sent a shiver through her. Do you believe him? She whispered. Ethan clenched his jaw. I don't know. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackle of pine needles in the fire. The following days were restless. They tried to go about their routines, foraging, hunting, checking traps, but the forest no longer felt safe. Every snapping twig might have been the stranger. Every rustle in the brush could have been another set of eyes watching. At night Ethan dreamed again. More flashes, more fragments. His mother's tear-streaked face. A voice raised in anger. The glint of a blade. And always the ink pressing into his skin. He woke with the phantom sting of a needle, the tattoo seeming darker each morning. On the fourth day Lila broke the silence. Maybe, we need to talk to him. Ethan whipped around. No. Absolutely not. Her eyes were wide but steady. He knows more than we do. About Mom. About Dad. About you. Aren't you tired of not knowing, Ethan? Of making up stories just to fill the silence? Her words struck deep. He had spent years telling her tales, stories to distract her from hunger, from the cold, from the truth of their abandonment. But he had no story for this. Only questions that burned holes in him. That night Ethan walked away from their camp, deeper into the woods. He needed air. Space. But the forest had other plans. He found himself standing before an old stump, carved with symbols he didn't recognize. Circles, slashes, strange angular shapes etched into the rotting wood. He ran his fingers over them and for the briefest moment, his tattoo seemed to burn. Those marks. A voice cut through the night. Ethan spun, heart slamming against his ribs. The stranger stepped from the shadows, lantern glowing faintly. His expression was calm, but his eyes gleamed with intensity. You've seen them before, haven't you? The man asked, nodding toward Ethan's arm. Ethan's hand instinctively covered the tattoo. Stay away from me. I can't, the man said simply. Not when I know what you carry. Ethan's throat tightened. Then tell me, what is it? What does it mean? The stranger lowered his lantern, its light casting long, wavering shadows. It's not a tattoo. It's a brand. A mark used by men who served someone dangerous. A man your mother feared more than anyone. A man who left his stain on you before you could even speak. Ethan's stomach turned. What? Why me? Because your father defied him, the stranger said quietly. And the price for defiance was blood. Your father's life, and your future. The words hit like a hammer. Ethan staggered back, his breath ragged. You're saying, this man killed my father. And branded me like some animal. The stranger's gaze softened. Not just you. Others too. You weren't the first, Ethan. But you might be the last. Ethan's mind reeled. Images of his mother, crying in the truck, begging them to be quiet as she drove them into the woods. Her final words before leaving them echoing, stay hidden. Stay safe. Suddenly they made sense. She hadn't abandoned them because she didn't care. She had left them because she feared the world outside would destroy them. Why are you telling me this? Ethan demanded, anger surging to mask the horror clawing inside him. The stranger's jaw tightened. Because I promised your mother. And because the man who marked you, he's still out there. The forest seemed to go silent, every living thing holding its breath. Ethan backed away, shaking his head. No. You're lying. This is just another trick. But deep down, in the place where memory and instinct blurred, he knew it wasn't. The stranger didn't chase him. He simply lifted the lantern higher, his voice carrying across the clearing. You can run from me, Ethan. But you can't run from the truth. Sooner or later, the mark will bring him to you. Ethan fled into the dark, the light of the lantern burning in his mind long after it vanished. When he returned to camp, Lila was awake, waiting. She took one look at his face and whispered, "What did he say?" Ethan sank beside her, his hands trembling. He said, "The mark belongs to the man who killed our father." Lila's breath caught, and for the first time since they were abandoned, Ethan saw something in her eyes he hadn't before. Not fear, not sadness, but rage. "Then we'll find him," she said, her voice fierce and steady. "We'll find him and we'll end this." Ethan stared at her, the firelight flickering across her face. She looked so young, so fragile, and yet, in that moment she was steel. For the first time Ethan realized their survival in the forest hadn't just been luck. It had been preparation. And now the forest children would become hunters. The decision was unspoken, but it hung heavy in the air between them. They would no longer run. Ethan had spent his whole life avoiding the outside world, keeping Lila hidden from anything human. Now he couldn't shake the stranger's words, "The mark will bring him to you." If the man who murdered their father still lived, if he still sought to claim what wasn't his, then hiding was no longer safety. It was a trap. For years the forest had shaped them into survivors. Now it would shape them into something else. That morning Ethan led Lila deeper into the woods, to the place where the deer moved in quiet herds and predators lingered unseen. It was there he began to teach her the lessons he had never spoken aloud. "How to watch without being seen," he said, crouching low in the underbrush. He pointed to a fox slipping soundlessly between trees, its paws leaving no trace. "Every shadow is your friend. Every sound can be your weapon." Lila mirrored his movements, her eyes sharp. She had always been quicker than him. What Ethan had learned through bruises and mistakes, Lila seemed to absorb instantly. She could spot animal trails he missed, hear distant footsteps he overlooked. By nightfall she was already weaving vines into snares, her small hands steady. Ethan watched her with pride, and a pang of guilt. She should have been living a life of innocence, not preparing to fight ghosts of a world that had abandoned them. Yet when he voiced his doubts, she cut him off. "They left us to die, Ethan. Mom, Dad, all of them. But we didn't die. We lived. And if this man thinks he can come back and take us now, he doesn't know what we are." Her voice trembled, but her eyes blazed. Ethan said nothing more. Over the next weeks, the siblings turned their survival skills into weapons. Ethan sharpened his spears to deadly points, practiced throwing them until the wood thudded deep into tree trunks. Lila crafted traps not just for animals, but for men. Pits disguised with leaves, snares that could snap a leg, sharpened stakes driven into the ground. The forest became their battlefield. But it wasn't only preparation. It was investigation. They began moving toward the edges of the piney woods, listening, watching. They followed trails not of deer but of men. Cigarette smoke drifting on the air, footprints pressed into soft earth, campfires still smoldering. One evening, crouched in the brush, they overheard voices. "Those kids the old man's looking for?" one hunter muttered, his tone low but carrying. "Yeah," the other replied. "Says he'll pay good money if we bring him in. Some tattoo nonsense like they're special." Ethan's blood went cold. He glanced at Lila, who clutched his arm, her eyes wide. The men continued, oblivious to the watchers in the dark. "Strangest thing I ever heard. But if he's paying?" The first man laughed. "Kids don't last long out here anyway. If they're even still alive." The sound of their laughter curdled in Ethan's stomach. He and Lila slipped away, silent as shadows. When they were safe, Ethan crouched close to her. "Did you hear that? He's not just one man. He has people hunting us." Lila's lips pressed into a thin line. "Then we hunt them first." And so they did. The next time they saw the hunters, the men never knew what hit them. Ethan's snare pulled one into the air, his rifle clattering to the ground. The other tripped a pit trap, crashing into sharpened stakes below. Their screams echoed briefly before the forest swallowed the sound. Ethan and Lila didn't stay to watch. They knew better. The forest would take care of the rest. That night, by the fire, Lila's hands shook as she cleaned her knife. Ethan placed a hand over hers, steadying her. "You're not like them," he said. She met his gaze, tears brimming but refusing to fall. "No, I'm worse. Because I don't feel sorry." Ethan didn't argue. Neither of them spoke of the blood. But something had shifted, a line crossed, a path chosen. They weren't prey anymore. They were predators. Yet even as they hardened, the stranger remained. They glimpsed him often now, always at a distance, always watching. He never threatened, never pursued. He just waited. And then one night he stepped from the shadows again. Not with a lantern this time, but with something in his hands, a small leather journal. "This belonged to your mother," he said, setting it gently on a rock where they could see. "Her words. Her truth. If you want answers, they're here." He backed away, fading into the trees, leaving the journal behind. Ethan and Lila stared at it, the firelight flickering across its worn cover. The choice lay before them, to open it or to turn away. Lila reached first, her fingers brushing the leather. "We need to know," she whispered. Ethan hesitated, heart pounding. But deep down he knew she was right. With trembling hands he opened the book. And the past began to speak. The fire's glow danced over the worn leather of the journal as Ethan opened it, careful not to tear the brittle pages. Lila pressed close, her small body trembling with anticipation. The ink was faded, but the words were clear enough to read, their mother's voice reaching across the years. "If you are reading this, it means you have survived. And if you have survived, it is because I could not protect you. I had to leave even when every part of me screamed not to. I pray you will understand one day." Ethan swallowed hard, tracing the words with his finger. Lila's hand found his, clutching it tightly. "Your father, he was brave and he was reckless. He discovered what I could not. A man named Silas Crowley who deals in death for money, for power. He is not like other men. He will stop at nothing. He killed your father when we tried to leave. I cannot stop him, not without losing you both as well. So I made a choice that haunts me still. I left you in the forest, hidden where no one could find you, praying you would survive long enough to grow strong." The word struck Ethan like a blow. His mother hadn't abandoned them out of cruelty, she had saved them by leaving them. And yet, the pain of betrayal and loneliness she had caused still resonated in his chest. "The mark on Ethan's arm, it is Silas's work. I tried to erase it when you were small, but it is too deep, too old. It binds you to him, a cruel signature meant to ensure that one day he would come for you. I hope you never meet him unprepared." Lila's hand tightened on his arm. "Ethan, it's him. Silas Crowley. That's the man the stranger was warning us about." Ethan nodded, his jaw clenched. He had suspected, but seeing the name on paper made it real, terrifyingly real. "I cannot tell you everything here. The forest will keep you safe until the right moment. Trust only each other. Your strength lies in your bond, not in anyone else's promises. And if you survive long enough to find Silas, make sure he knows the price of his crimes." The journal went on to detail fragments of their mother's life, the days she had hidden them, the people she had bribed, the houses she had fled through, always keeping them out of reach of Crowley's eyes. It was a story of fear, courage, and endless running. Ethan's mind whirled. Every hardship they had endured in the forest, every close encounter with predators, human or animal, had been preparation for this moment. Survival had never been random. Their mother's foresight had guided them, leaving cryptic trails they had followed unknowingly. "Remember, children, strength is not only in your hands but in your mind. You will face men who think you are weak. Show them otherwise. And always, always trust the forest. It is alive and it will protect those who know its language." Lila's eyes glistened. "Mom, she believed in us. She knew we could do this." Ethan folded the journal carefully. The firelight reflected off his tattoo. He traced the ink, feeling the weight of it anew. The mark was not just a curse. It was a warning, a connection, and now a key. It tied them to Silas Crowley, the man who had destroyed their family. "Lila," he said, voice firm. We've survived this long. We know the forest. We know how to move, how to hunt. And now, we know why we were left. We can't just survive anymore. We have to end this. We have to find him. She nodded, determination blazing in her eyes. We will. Together. For the first time in years, Ethan felt a flicker of hope, not just for survival but for justice. Outside, the forest whispered around them, the wind carrying the scent of pine and the promise of reckoning. They were no longer children abandoned. They were hunters, forged by the forest, armed with knowledge, and ready to confront the man who had haunted their family for too long. The fire crackled as the siblings packed the journal carefully. The journey ahead would be dangerous, and every step toward Silas Crowley would test the skills and resilience that had kept them alive all these years. But they were ready. For the first time, the past and present aligned. The forest had made them strong, and Margaret Anderson's secret had given them purpose. Ethan glanced at Lila, seeing the steel in her gaze mirror his own. Together, they would follow the trail their mother had left, straight into the shadow of the man who had branded them with blood and fear. And nothing, not even Silas Crowley, would be able to stop them. The morning fog clung to the forest floor like a living thing, curling around roots and rocks, thick enough to obscure the siblings' path. Ethan led the way, Lila close behind, both moving silently, their bodies instinctively attuned to the rhythm of the woods. The journal lay in Lila's pack, a compass of secrets and warnings from a mother whose courage had carried them this far. Now it guided them toward the man who had destroyed their family. Ethan's mind raced as they followed a narrow deer trail that led deeper into unknown territory. The forest was alive in ways both beautiful and menacing. Birds cawed, startled by their movement. The wind carried the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. To anyone else, it might have seemed serene, but to Ethan and Lila, it was a map of danger, each sound and shadow a signal. The journal mentions his routes, Ethan whispered, glancing at Lila. Silas Crowley keeps to predictable paths. He's arrogant. Thinks the world bends to him. That's our advantage. Lila nodded, adjusting the straps of her pack. Her eyes were sharp, scanning every shadow, every flicker of movement. At 13 she had become more than Ethan's sister. She was a partner, a strategist, a predator in her own right. We'll follow the river first. It's isolated, easier to avoid other people. The journal says he uses it to travel supplies. Their first day of tracking was a lesson in patience. Hours passed in near silence, the only sounds their careful footsteps and occasional bird calls. They avoided open clearings and the edges of the forest where hunters might leave traces. Ethan's arm brushed against the tattoo on his bicep. Its lines seemed darker under the filtered sunlight, almost glowing with warning. It was a mark of danger, yes, but also a reminder that the forest had kept them alive, and now it would guide them to justice. By late afternoon they reached a shallow creek, its waters clear and cold. Lila crouched, cupping her hands to drink, while Ethan scanned the surrounding woods. Tracks were everywhere, deer, raccoon, even a fox. But among them were others, fresher, heavier, the boots of a man who had passed recently. They're close, Ethan muttered, kneeling to examine the prints. They were large, and the soles bore a symbol, a jagged mark he recognized from the stranger's warnings. Silas's men were nearby. The realization sent adrenaline coursing through them. Lila's hands gripped her makeshift spear tighter. Then we move carefully, she whispered. No mistakes. No noise. Night fell as they made camp in a small hollow, surrounded by tall pines. The fire was low, just enough to keep the damp cold from seeping into their bones. Ethan cleaned his knives, Lila weaving a crude net of vines to catch any stray animals. I can't believe Mom knew all this would happen, Lila said, breaking the silence. She left us here to become killers. Ethan's jaw tightened. Not killers. Survivors. And now hunters. Mom gave us tools, Lila. Skills, knowledge, instincts. Silas thought he could erase our family. He underestimated us. Lila nodded, eyes glinting in the firelight. Then we show him he was wrong. They slept little, ears straining for any sound. Every branch snap, every rustle of leaves, every distant call of an owl was amplified in the quiet night. At times, Lila would stir, murmuring in her sleep about chasing shadows, and Ethan would hold her close, whispering reminders of patience and focus. The next morning they moved again, following the creek upstream. Hours into their trek, Ethan paused, signaling for Lila to crouch. Ahead, a faint trail of smoke rose through the trees. Not a campfire, but a signal, deliberate, calculated. Someone was waiting. They approached cautiously. Behind a thicket they spotted a small clearing. There, a figure moved with careful precision, arranging supplies and checking a map spread on a tree stump. His build, posture, and the faint glint of a knife at his belt confirmed Ethan's fear. It was one of Silas's men. Ethan's pulse quickened. Lila crouched beside him, her hand on his arm. "We can't fight him." "Not yet," she hissed. "But we can watch." For hours they observed. The man didn't notice them, absorbed in his own calculations. Ethan traced the tattoo on his arm absent-mindedly, feeling the weight of its warning. It was more than a mark now, it was destiny. This man, this crew, they were the first step toward confronting Silas Crowley himself. Suddenly, movement caught Lila's eye. Another figure, younger, perhaps a scout, approached from the opposite side of the clearing. Their eyes met for the briefest second. A child of the world they had abandoned, a spy in service of the man who had destroyed their family. Ethan hissed, yanking Lila backward. The scout didn't see them. But the encounter confirmed what they feared. Silas was methodical, ruthless, and his reach was far. They retreated silently, hearts pounding. Once they were far enough, Lila finally whispered, "We can't wait much longer, Ethan. We need to act." Ethan knew she was right. Weeks of preparation, years of survival, and the guidance of their mother's journal had led them to this point. Silas's network, the markings, the camps, all clues pointing toward one inevitable confrontation. The forest seemed to pulse around them, alive and aware. Every rustle of leaves, every shadow cast by the moonlight, seemed to whisper encouragement. For the first time, the forest was not just a home or a refuge. It was an ally, a silent partner in their hunt. That night, Ethan traced the tattoo again, feeling the ink's dark edges burn under his touch. Lila lay beside him, whispering strategies they would use, traps they would set, ways to anticipate Silas's movements. Together they wove a plan, not for survival but for retribution. The journal had prepared them with knowledge, the forest had shaped them into predators, and the tattoo had bound them to their purpose. The next move would not be about hiding or running. It would be about stepping into the shadows, into danger, and reclaiming what was theirs. Ethan looked at Lila, determination hardening his features. "Tomorrow," he said, voice low but firm, "we begin. We track him, we find him, and we make him pay." Lila's eyes blazed. Together. The forest seemed to hum around them, alive with anticipation. Somewhere in the shadows, Silas Crowley waited, unaware that the children he had branded were no longer prey, they were the hunters now. And as the wind whispered through the trees, carrying the scent of rain and earth, Ethan felt the first surge of a dark hope. The reckoning was coming. They would not be stopped. They would not be denied. And in the shadowed depths of the forest, a legend was beginning to take shape, one of vengeance, survival, and the relentless pursuit of justice. The dawn rose over the Piney Woods, pale and fragile, filtering through the towering pines like shards of glass. Ethan and Lila had been moving for hours, following the trail their mother had meticulously documented in her journal. Every footprint, every discarded object, every faint ember of fire led them deeper into the heart of the forest, farther from civilization and closer to the man who had destroyed their family. Ethan paused on a ridge, scanning the mist-laden valley below. The forest stretched endlessly, a labyrinth of shadow and light. The wind carried whispers through the trees, and for a moment, he swore he could hear the ghosts of his childhood. His mother's desperate plea, the echo of Silas Crowley's cruelty, and the laughter of a life they had been denied. Lila crouched beside him, adjusting the straps of her makeshift satchel. Her eyes, sharp as a hawk's, scanned the underbrush. "Do you think he knows we're coming?" she asked softly. Ethan's jaw tightened. "He knows. He's always known." The siblings moved with a precision that only years of survival in the forest could teach. Branches snapped softly underfoot, but they were careful, almost ritualistic in how they placed their weight. They followed the trail Ethan had memorized from the journal. Marks on trees, a disturbed patch of soil, a broken branch bent at an unnatural angle. The forest itself seemed to guide them, whispering directions only they could hear. By midday they came to a clearing. The air smelled of damp earth and rotting leaves, a scent both familiar and unsettling. Lila crouched low, peering through the mist. Something glimmered in the distance, a patch of metal, perhaps a discarded can or a tool. But Ethan's gut told him otherwise. He signaled for her to stay silent. As they approached, they realized it was a trap, a crude snare cleverly disguised with pine needles and moss. Ethan's heart raced. The forest had its own rules, and those who trespassed or moved with arrogance could pay dearly. But they weren't trespassers. They were hunters now, guided by a purpose stronger than fear. Ethan knelt to examine the trap, noting its sophistication. The craftsmanship was precise, intentional, not the work of a casual hunter. "He's testing us," he murmured, tracing the thin cord with his fingers. "Silas? Or someone working for him?" Lila's hand went to her knife. "Then we test him right back." The next hours were a careful dance of anticipation and observation. They moved silently through the undergrowth, pausing whenever a sound hinted at danger. Birds scattered overhead, startled by their movement, and the distant roar of a waterfall masked any noise they made. Their senses were heightened to an almost supernatural level. Every shift in wind, every shadow, every scent carried meaning. By evening they reached a river that cut through the forest like a silver ribbon. Ethan crouched, tracing the tracks along the muddy bank. Their unmistakable footprints, deep and deliberate, marked the passage of someone familiar. Silas Crowley's followers, perhaps, or the man himself. Lila's eyes narrowed. "He's close," she whispered. Ethan nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. They had trained for this moment, but nothing could erase the tension, the knowledge that each step could bring them face to face with the killer who had haunted their lives for decades. Night fell quickly, the forest shifting into an eerie tableau of silhouettes and whispers. Ethan and Lila set up a temporary shelter in a hollowed-out grove, the fire barely more than a flicker, enough to provide warmth but not enough to betray their position. As they settled, Lila spoke first. "Do you ever think, maybe the forest is alive?" Ethan looked at her, eyebrows raised. "It is alive." She leaned back against a mossy tree trunk. "I mean, maybe it's trying to help us. Or warn us. Look at today. Every step we took, the forest was guiding us, keeping us alive." Ethan considered her words. He had long believed the forest to be a teacher, a protector, a sanctuary. And now, more than ever, it felt almost sentient, a force shaping their path, pushing them towards Silas, but also shielding them from immediate danger. Hours later, while Ethan kept watch, Lila drifted into a light, restless sleep. Her breathing was uneven, punctuated by small murmurs. Ethan studied her face in the dim firelight, the same face that had smiled at sunlight piercing through the canopy, the same face that had cried in his arms during storms, the same face that now bore the fierce determination of a young hunter. Suddenly, a sharp sound cracked through the night, the snap of a twig, far too deliberate to be random. Ethan froze, listening. Silence followed for a moment, then another crack, closer this time. His hand moved instinctively to the knife at his belt, muscles coiled like springs. A figure emerged from the shadows, not Silas but someone unexpected. The stranger who had once brought them their mother's journal. His lantern was gone, replaced by the faint glow of moonlight catching the edges of his coat. His eyes met Ethan's, calm but urgent. "You're heading into a trap," he said, voice low. "Silas knows you're coming. This part of the forest, it's his domain now. He's prepared for you." Ethan's hands tightened around his knife. "We don't have a choice." The man shook his head. "You do. But once you step further in, there's no turning back. He's been waiting for this. Waiting for you to make the first move." Lila stirred awake, sensing tension in the air. Her gaze darted between Ethan and the stranger. "What do you mean?" "Silas has traps. He has followers. He knows your skills. And he knows about the tattoo," the man said. "That mark isn't just a symbol. It's a key, a connection to something he's obsessed with. You're walking into his world." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Then we'll turn the tables." The stranger studied him silently for a long moment before nodding. "Very well. But remember, the forest can only protect you so far. After this, it's your own strength, your own cunning that will keep you alive." The siblings spent the rest of the night preparing. Ethan sharpened knives, checked snares, and traced the riverbank for safe crossings. Lila did the same, her movements fluid and confident, yet her eyes betrayed the flicker of fear Ethan knew she felt but would never admit. By the first light of dawn they were ready. Their minds were focused, their bodies primed, every sense attuned to the forest and its secrets. They knew this confrontation could mean death, or vengeance. But for the first time they felt a fierce thrill mingled with fear. The forest whispered around them as they moved, shadows stretching long in the early light. Every rustle of leaves, every distant bird call, every bend in the path carried potential danger, or opportunity. They were hunters now, not prey. And the time to strike, to reclaim what was stolen, was finally at hand. As they disappeared into the misty undergrowth, the forest seemed to pulse around them, alive with anticipation. Every step brought them closer to Silas Crowley, the man who had destroyed their family, the man who had branded Ethan, and the man who would finally pay. And in the depths of the forest, The children who had survived abandonment, starvation, and fear were about to confront the shadow of their past. The hunt had begun. The forest changed as they pressed deeper into its heart. It was subtle at first. The trees grew denser, the canopy darker, the silence heavier. Birds no longer sang here, and the wind seemed to carry only stillness. Ethan felt the shift in his bones. This was not just another stretch of woods. This was his domain, Silas Crowley's. They moved carefully, every sense alive. The ground underfoot was littered with broken branches and animal bones, arranged in ways that felt intentional, almost ritualistic. Lila noticed it too. She crouched near a pile of bleached bones stacked like a cairn, her hand trembling as she reached toward it. "He wants people to know this is his territory," she whispered. "It's a warning." Ethan pulled her back. "It's a message. But not for us. For anyone who dared to come looking." The deeper they went, the more the forest bore his mark. Carvings scarred the bark of ancient pines. Symbols Ethan recognized faintly, echoes of the tattoo branded on his own skin. Spirals, slashes, crude faces with hollow eyes. Some were fresh, the wood still oozing sap. Others were old, weathered, and dark. "This is wrong," Lila murmured. "The forest isn't his. It's alive, it belongs to itself. But he's trying to twist it." Ethan glanced at her, her voice carrying a rare blend of anger and reverence. She had always felt a bond with the woods, a sense that it wasn't just a home but a guardian. Seeing it desecrated like this made her blood boil. As the sun began to set, they reached the edge of a ravine. Below, tucked against the rocks and hidden by the trees, was a cabin. Smoke curled from a crooked chimney, faint and gray against the evening sky. Silas's lair. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. It looked almost ordinary, just a cabin in the woods, but he knew better. Danger seeped from its very walls. This was where their father had died, where their mother had fled, and where their own fates had been bound before they could even speak. Lila crouched beside him, her eyes narrowed. "So this is it." He nodded. "This is it." They waited until nightfall, watching from the shadows. Shapes moved around the cabin, 2, maybe 3 men, armed and watchful. Followers. Ethan and Lila studied their patterns, the way they circled, where their eyes lingered, where they grew careless. Years of tracking animals had made them experts in patience. Finally, when the forest was thick with night and the guards' movements grew lazy, Ethan signaled. They slipped from their perch and moved like ghosts, weaving through the brush, every footstep calculated, every breath measured. They reached the outer ring of the cabin undetected. The smell of smoke and something fouler, rotting meat perhaps, filled their noses. A lantern burned low by the door, casting a sickly glow across the clearing. And then they heard it. A voice. Deep, gravelly, commanding. "Keep watch. They're here. I can feel it." Silas Crowley. The sound of his voice sent a chill through Ethan's blood. He glanced at Lila, whose eyes were wide but steady. This was no longer a ghost story or a memory. The man who had haunted their lives was real, flesh and blood, just yards away. "Should we wait?" Lila whispered. Ethan shook his head. "No. We've waited long enough." They crept closer, using the darkness as cover. From a crack in the wall, Ethan peered inside. Silas sat at a rough-hewn table, hunched over something, a book or perhaps a map. His hair was gray now, but his presence was as menacing as ever. The tattoo on his forearm, a darker, larger version of Ethan's own, caught the firelight. 2 men flanked him, armed with rifles. They looked bored, but Ethan knew better than to underestimate them. Lila tugged at his sleeve. "What do we do?" Ethan's mind raced. They couldn't fight him here, not outright. But they could strike the edges, weaken the defenses, make Silas uneasy. The forest had always been their ally, and now it would become their weapon. They retreated silently, retreating far enough that their whispers would not carry. Ethan crouched low, drawing a rough map in the dirt with his finger. "We can't take him head-on. Not yet. But we can bleed him. Isolate him. Take his men out first." Lila nodded, her face set with determination. "We use the forest." That night they set their first traps. A rope snare hidden where one of the guards liked to smoke. A pit lined with sharpened stakes, disguised with brush, near the cabin's water barrel. Stones carefully loosened on a ridge above the path, ready to avalanche at the slightest touch. By dawn the siblings were gone, vanished back into the forest. But their presence lingered like a ghostly hand. The first scream echoed just after sunrise. One of the guards had stumbled into the snare, his body swinging wildly as the rope bit into his ankle. Another, rushing to help, triggered the pit and fell with a sickening crunch. Ethan and Lila watched from the shadows, their faces expressionless. This was not cruelty. This was survival and justice. Inside the cabin, Silas roared with fury. "Find them. Bring me their heads." His voice shook the trees, but Ethan and Lila only tightened their grip on their weapons. They had seen his face, heard his rage. He was no longer a shadow in their nightmares. He was a man. And men could bleed. As the sun rose higher, the forest itself seemed to turn against Silas. Birds scattered, animals grew restless, and every path carried danger. His men cursed and stumbled, falling one by one into traps too cunning for ordinary hunters. By midday, silence fell again over the clearing. Only the cabin remained, standing like a fortress in the heart of the woods. Silas was alone now, his followers gone. Ethan and Lila crouched in the underbrush, their eyes locked on the cabin. The time for games was over. The trap had been sprung and the forest had answered their call. It was only a matter of time before Silas Crowley himself stepped into the shadows where they waited. And when he did, the forest would strike back one final time. The forest was quiet again. Too quiet. Ethan crouched low, eyes fixed on the cabin, its wooden planks glowing faintly in the fading light of dusk. The clearing around it was littered with silence. The absence of guards, the absence of movement, the absence of life. Only smoke rose from the crooked chimney, twisting like a serpent into the sky. Silas Crowley was alone. Ethan felt his heartbeat hammering against his ribs. For years, Silas had been a ghost in his nightmares, a faceless monster who had branded him, murdered their father, and forced their mother to abandon them. Now he was flesh and blood, sitting inside that cabin, waiting. Lila touched Ethan's arm. Her eyes were steady, though her lips trembled slightly. "We've come this far," she whispered. "It ends tonight." Ethan nodded. Together, they moved like shadows, weaving through the underbrush until they were pressed against the cabin's outer wall. The wood smelled of smoke and pine tar, rough beneath their fingers. Ethan pressed his ear to a crack, listening. Inside, Silas's voice carried. "Come. Patient. I knew you'd come." Ethan froze. "You think I didn't see it in your eyes, boy? That fire? You're your father's son. Always too stubborn to die." Ethan pulled back, his blood running cold. Silas was speaking to them. He knew they were here. Lila's hand went to her knife, her knuckles white. Ethan shook his head. They needed to be smart. But the cabin door creaked open before he could stop her. Silas Crowley stepped into the clearing. Time seemed to stretch, every detail seared into Ethan's memory, the broad shoulders cloaked in a tattered coat, the silver streaks in his black hair, the tattoo coiling like a serpent around his forearm. His eyes, sharp, calculating, and cruel, locked onto Ethan and Lila as though he had been waiting for them his whole life. "Well," Silas said, his voice smooth but edged with menace. "The forest children finally crawl back to me." Ethan stepped out from the shadows, spear in hand. "We're not yours." Silas's mouth curved into a cold smile. "Aren't you? That mark on your arm says otherwise. You carry me with you, boy. Every breath you've taken, every step you've walked, it's all been under my shadow." Lila's voice cut through the air. "You murdered our father. You branded Ethan. You hunted us. And you think we'll ever belong to you?" Silas laughed, low and chilling. "Your father was weak. He thought he could defy me. And your mother? She thought she could hide you. But the forest can't erase blood. You were always going to return." Ethan's grip tightened on his spear. "We didn't return. We survived. And we're here to end you." Silas's eyes gleamed with dark amusement. "And me? Children, I made you. Without me you'd have died out here. That forest you cling to, it's mine. Every trap you set, every skill you learned, you owe to me. I was the fire that forged you." "No," Ethan growled. "The forest forged us. You only tried to break us." With a sudden roar, Ethan lunged, his spear aimed at Silas's chest. The older man moved with surprising speed, sidestepping and grabbing the shaft. The two clashed in the clearing, the spear cracking against the strength of Silas's grip. Lila darted forward, her knife flashing in the firelight. Silas swung the spear, forcing her back, but not before her blade sliced across his arm. Blood bloomed against his coat. Silas snarled, his voice like gravel. "You're stronger than I expected. Good. That means breaking you will be sweeter." The fight surged like a storm. Ethan and Lila moved as one, weaving in and out of Silas's reach, their movements honed by years of surviving together. Ethan struck high, forcing Silas to defend, while Lila darted low, her knife carving quick arcs. But Silas was no ordinary man. His years had not softened him, they had sharpened him like steel. He fought with brutal precision, every movement calculated to maim, to kill. His fists were like hammers, his kicks like axes cutting through the underbrush. Ethan staggered as Silas's punch connected with his ribs, knocking the breath from his lungs. Lila cried out as Silas caught her by the wrist, twisting until she dropped her knife. "Pathetic," Silas hissed, shoving her to the ground. "You think you can stand against me? You are children playing at war." But as he turned back to Ethan, Lila's voice rang out, fierce and unbroken. "No, Silas. We're not children anymore." She rolled, grabbing a stone from the ground, and hurled it with all her strength. It struck Silas across the temple with a sickening crack. He stumbled, dazed for the first time. Ethan seized the opening. With a roar, he drove his shoulder into Silas's chest, forcing him back toward the cabin. They crashed against the wall, the wood splintering under the force. Silas clawed at Ethan, his nails digging into flesh, but Ethan didn't let go. Years of rage, of pain, of abandonment poured out in that moment. Ethan's fists pummeled Silas's face, each strike fueled by every night spent starving, every storm endured, every nightmare silenced by Lila's quiet sobs. Silas staggered, blood running down his face, but still he laughed, a ghastly broken sound. "You can't kill me, boy. I live in you. In that mark. You'll never be free." Ethan raised his spear again, ready to end it. But Lila's hand caught his arm. Her eyes burned with fury and sorrow. "No, Ethan. He doesn't get to decide how this ends. We do." Together they shoved Silas back into the cabin. He stumbled over the threshold, crashing into the table. The lantern toppled, flames licking across the wood. Within seconds, fire roared to life, devouring the cabin. Smoke billowed, sparks flying into the night. Silas struggled to rise, but his strength faltered at last. Ethan and Lila stood in the doorway, the firelight painting their faces. "You didn't make us," Ethan said, voice steady. "The forest did. And now it's taking you back." Silas's scream was swallowed by the flames as the cabin collapsed around him. The siblings turned away, the inferno lighting the night behind them. The air was thick with smoke, but for the first time Ethan felt a weight lift from his chest. Silas Crowley was gone. The man who had haunted them, who had claimed their lives as his own, had been consumed by the same forest he tried to control. But as they stood together in the clearing watching the fire burn, Ethan knew this was not the end. It was the beginning of something else. The fire burned long into the night. Ethan and Lila stood in the clearing, the glow of the flames painting their faces in shifting shades of gold and crimson. The cabin that had been Silas Crowley's den, his lair, his sanctuary, his prison, was nothing more than a collapsing skeleton, its bones crackling as they turned to ash. Neither of them spoke. Words felt too small against the enormity of what they had just done. The forest around them was alive with sound. The crackle of fire, the hiss of sap boiling inside pine trunks, the occasional crash of beams falling in showers of sparks. But beyond that, the night was eerily still. As if the entire Piney Woods held its breath, watching, listening, bearing witness to the end of a shadow that had haunted it for decades. Ethan's hand ached where the spear had been. His knuckles were split and raw, blood drying into crust. Each breath burned in his chest from where Silas had struck him, and yet the pain felt distant, drowned out by a deeper, stranger sensation. Relief. Lila leaned against him, her body trembling, though her eyes remained fixed on the blaze. She hadn't cried, not when Silas struck her, not when they shoved him into the cabin, not when the fire took him. But now, as the flames began to dim into embers, her lips parted and a broken whisper slipped free. "It's over." Ethan placed his arm around her shoulders. "Yes, it's over." But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't. Not completely. The past didn't die with Silas Crowley. It lived on in their scars, the faded burn of the tattoo on Ethan's arm, the calluses on their hands from years of clawing survival out of the wild, the hollow places left by their parents' absence. And it lived in the silence that followed the fire. As dawn crept into the forest, the last of the cabin collapsed, leaving only smoke and charred ruin. Birds began to sing cautiously as though testing the air. The forest, it seemed, was reclaiming the ground. Ethan and Lila gathered what little they had, their knives, their packs, the scraps of Margaret's journal they had saved from Silas's grasp. They didn't look back. They walked for hours, their footsteps crunching over pine needles, their shadows stretching long in the early light. Neither spoke, but both felt the same unspoken truth. Silas was gone, but his echo remained. Every sound in the forest seemed charged with memory. A snapping branch brought back the countless nights they'd hidden from him, hearts pounding. The scent of smoke reminded them of their mother's words scrawled in the journal, of her warning that Silas would never stop. Lila finally broke the silence. Do you think she knew this would be the only way? Ethan didn't answer right away. He thought of Margaret's words, of her sorrow, her confession, her desperate choice to abandon them to save them. A choice that had carved their childhood into shadows. I think, Ethan said slowly, she knew he wouldn't stop. And she hoped we'd survive long enough to be free. Lila's voice cracked. But she left us. She left us to him. She left us to the forest, Ethan said gently. And the forest saved us. They walked on. By midday they reached the river that wound like a silver thread through the piney woods. Its surface shimmered in the light, and for the first time in years, Ethan felt something like peace in the sound of water rushing over stone. They sat on the bank, drinking deeply, washing the blood and dirt from their hands and faces. Lila stared at her reflection in the rippling water. For so long she had seen only a child, scared, hungry, desperate. Now she saw someone else. Older, ardent, stronger. Who are we without him? She asked softly. Ethan looked at her, really looked at her. The girl who had followed him into every storm, who had shared every scrap of food, who had kept him alive as much as he had kept her. We're us, he said. And that's enough. They rested there until the sun dipped low again. The forest stretched out before them, vast and unending, filled with both beauty and danger. But for the first time it didn't feel like a cage. It felt like a home they could choose, or leave behind. As twilight fell, Lila pulled the scraps of their mother's journal from her pack. She unfolded one page, the ink faded but still legible. If they survive, if they endure, then they will be stronger than the darkness that hunts them. They will carry me with them. They will carry hope. Lila's hands trembled as she held the page. She glanced at Ethan, her eyes shimmering. We're still carrying her. Ethan nodded. And now we carry us. That night they built a fire of their own. Not for defense. Not for survival. For warmth. For light. For the promise of tomorrow. The flames crackled softly, nothing like the inferno that had consumed Silas's cabin. This fire belonged to them. As they sat side by side, Ethan realized that survival was no longer the only thing driving them. They had survived. They had endured. And now they had to decide what to do with the lives they had fought so hard to keep. For the first time in years, the forest seemed to whisper not warnings but possibilities. And in the quiet between the trees, Ethan and Lila began to dream of what came next. The forest had always been their world. It had been the cradle that held them after abandonment, the teacher that hardened them, the battlefield that tested them. For 22 years Ethan and Lila had known no other life than beneath the towering canopy of the piney woods. But now, as dawn stretched pale fingers of light through the branches, they stood at its edge. The trees parted ahead, revealing a road, cracked, forgotten, but still leading outward. Beyond it lay the hum of the world they had been denied. Ethan squinted at the horizon. Telephone poles leaned like tired sentinels along the roadside, wires humming faintly in the wind. In the far distance, faint plumes of smoke hinted at towns, at lives, at people. Lila clutched the journal pages in her hands, their edges worn smooth from countless readings. She glanced back once into the forest's embrace. For so long it had been both prison and protector. Leaving it felt like leaving a part of herself. Do you think we'll ever belong out there? She asked quietly. Ethan's gaze lingered on the road. I don't know. But we'll never find out if we don't try. They stepped forward together, the crunch of gravel beneath their boots startlingly loud after the soft hush of pine needles. The road felt alien beneath their feet, harder, less forgiving than the forest floor. But each step was a choice. As they walked, memories flickered like ghosts. Nights spent huddled together against storms. The first rabbit they caught with a snare. The sound of Silas's footsteps haunting their dreams. Their mother's words, heavy with sorrow and hope. Those echoes followed them, but they did not weigh them down. Instead, they gave their steps purpose. By midday they reached a small town. Its edges were worn, a gas station with peeling paint, a diner with flickering neon, a handful of houses sagging with age. People paused as the siblings passed, eyes lingering on their rough clothes, their wary posture, the faint scars etched into their skin. Ethan felt every stare like a blade. He tightened his grip on his pack, ready for judgment, ready to turn back if he had to. But Lila lifted her chin, her expression calm, almost defiant. They walked into the diner, the bell above the door jangling. Warm air, thick with the scent of coffee and fried food, washed over them. For the first time in years, They sat at a table not carved from fallen logs, but polished wood. A waitress approached, her smile hesitant. "What can I get you too?" Lila's voice wavered, but she managed, "Coffee. Please." The waitress nodded, disappearing behind the counter. Lila looked at Ethan, her eyes wide. "We did it. We're here." Ethan swallowed hard. He thought of Silas, of the fire, of the forest's endless shadows. He thought of their mother, writing her last words into the journal. And then he thought of this moment, of his sister's voice steadying, of the warmth of the mug pressed into his hands when the waitress returned, of the taste of bitter coffee that somehow felt like triumph. "This isn't the end," Ethan said softly. "It's just another beginning." Later, when they stepped back out into the sunlight, the world seemed brighter than before. Not easier, not safer, but open. What? Waiting. The siblings turned back once more to the forest. It loomed dark and mysterious behind them, its secrets buried in ash and echo. But they no longer belonged to it. They belonged to themselves. Ethan looked at Lila, her eyes reflecting the sky, not the trees. "Where do we go from here?" She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that held both sorrow and hope. "Anywhere we want." Hand in hand, they walked down the road, leaving the forest behind, carrying its lessons with them. The piney woods whispered in the wind, not as a warning but as a farewell. And for the first time in their lives, Ethan and Lila did not look back. What do you think truly happened in this haunting tale of the siblings lost and found? Could fate or something darker have tied their past to the killer's mark? Share your thoughts below, and let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more chilling mysteries like this one.